Hey, what's up, everybody? I hope you're doing fine wherever you are today. This is a presenter, Jintuk Stories, and I'm hoping that you're doing great wherever you are. Now, this video today is so gonna be eye-opening, and I ask everyone to pay attention to this because this is something that has been happening and it is still happening, right? How the corporates are using capitalism to exploit the black labor, right? And you know very well that it is the black labor that made the United States. So you might be curious and you might want to know, how did these people, what models, what techniques did these people use to make it possible to extract surplus from black people? Because I know everyone knows this. If you understand history, black people are the ones who made the United States through blood, sweat, and their hard work. How did the corporates manage to rip off the surplus out of black people? In this video, I'm also going to be discussing the models that these people use. For example, they use what is called a racialized capitalism model, and the traditional model that was also used was classical capitalist model, which was wage labor and surplus value, right? Because you know very well that the corporates will always find a way of benefiting from its workers, and they don't even care about how they feel. At the end of the day, it's about the profit. But why is this video so revealing? Why is this video so important to black folks, my audience that I'm talking about? You know very well that I've been hosting Richard DeWolf in this channel for the longest time because it discusses and it criticizes capitalism. However, on the flip side, capitalism could be used as a tool to create wealth, but at what expense? It is always at the expense of people. And you know very well that historically, black people were denied the rights to education, and white people got a huge head start in regards to this. And so what this means? This means that black people settled for less paying wages. And when black people settle for less paying wages, what does this mean? The corporates find a ground of doing this to these people. So I want us to watch this video. I'll be back and then we'll have the discussion together. Until then, stay tuned. If you're watching this video for the first time, please subscribe, like, and share so that we can get all to learn in this video. Let's get into it. I'll be back.
Go and sit with a private employer and you discuss what you're going to do, work in this software company or in this hamburger joint or whatever it is. You sit and you discuss, I'm going to come in Monday through Friday at 8 o'clock and stay till 5. You know, I'm going to work with this machine in this corner under these rules. And then you get to that key moment, how much are we going to get paid for this? And let's say, just for the simplicity, I'm going to get paid $20 an hour. At that moment, Marx says something which was a theoretical breakthrough, even though everybody knows this. But it's often true that the greatest breakthroughs are putting into words what we kind of all knew, but quite didn't see. Here's his idea. If you're going to be paid by an employer $20 an hour, the following statement must be true. During that hour, your labor produces more for the employer that he sells at the end of the day than $20 worth. Because that's why he's in the... If paying you 20, you went to work and you did an output that gave another 20 for him to sell, then he's got nothing out of this. He's made 20 by selling what your labor helped to produce, but he's got to give it to you. And even though he likes you, he's not going to do that. There has to be in it, here we go, something for him. You have to produce, this is ineluctable, you have to produce more in every hour than you get paid. Otherwise, this system doesn't work. So for those of you, and I have to tell you this because partly you need to hear it and partly I admit I get a kick out of telling you. Those of you who think that in a capitalist system you're never going to work for anybody who doesn't pay you what you're worth, you don't understand the system you're in. That is never going to happen because that's how this system works. So that when you go home at the end of a workday and you feel vaguely ripped off, it's because you are. And the psychologist or others who helps you get over that feeling isn't doing you any favor. You need that feeling to fuel, well, it's very important, to fuel a recognition that that's what capitalist production is. You hire workers. Part of the time that they work, they produce an output that is given back to them at the end of the week. That's their wage. And part of it, that's your necessary labor. That's what Marx called it. The labor you do for your employer that's necessary for you, because during that time you're producing something for the employer. You all do know, right? You produce for the employer for 8 hours. Then you go home and you leave in the workplace what you produce. Because if you take that home with you, what you produce, people in dark blue uniforms come to your house and they hurt you. Okay? So you learn, no, don't do that. You got to leave there what you did. It's not yours. As fast as you produce it, it belongs to somebody else. So you work part of the time for yourself. You produce value that's paid back to you as your wage. But the only reason the employer hires you is that part of the time you do surplus labor. You do work, brains and muscle, that produces value that is beyond what you're paid. You produced it, you don't get it. Again, you produced it, you don't get it. Who gets it? The employer gets it. He gets the surplus. Fast forward to General Motors. 100, 200,000 people producing surplus. Who gets it? The board of directors. How big is that? That's 15 people. That's the law in the United States and in all capitals. 15 people draw into their hands the surplus of all the employees that are busy using their brains and muscles to make cars and trucks and all the other things General Motors makes. The board of directors, 12, 15 people, decide what to do with the surplus. And now, very quickly, part of it goes to the government in taxes. Profits tax on corporations. They have to, you know why? Because if they don't, the government comes, shuts them down. But that's not much of a discussion. But they do spend a lot of time trying to get that reduced, don't they? And now you know why. Because the less of the surplus they have to pay in taxes, the more of the surplus is available for what? Let's see. One of the other things you have to do with the surplus is pay managers. Managers don't make cars and trucks. They wouldn't have the faintest idea of how even to start. Their job is to do completely other things that don't produce anything. For example, the purchasing manager, what does he or she do? They go and buy the raw rubber and the raw steel and the other things that go into the car. They don't make anything. They're out there buying stuff. The sales manager, does he make anything? No. His job is to take the finished product, the car, and get rid of it, sell it to somebody. So you got to have all these people doing this if the enterprise is going to work, but they don't produce any value for you. So how do you pay them? You got to take a part of the surplus produced by those workers who produce for you something that you sell, and you give it to the managers. And now here comes a real simple idea. If you can save on taxes, that's less of the surplus you got to piss away as a capitalist on the taxes to the government, the more you can pay your top managers. Now there's an incentive. You tell your CEO, you get the taxes reduced, you get a bonus. The surplus that I would otherwise have to give the government, I give you. Where else is the surplus? It goes to the clerks, all those white-collar workers who keep records. You know, did you come in on time? The person who keeps a record of whether the workers come in on time, they don't produce cars or trucks. They do no productive work at all. They do work that the company has to have. Got to keep records of who showed up and who didn't. But they don't help produce anything. So they get paid by another piece of the surplus. Next to last. Shareholders. Part of the surplus that is earned by a company from all of its productive workers who make stuff, part of that is used and distributed to the shareholders, the owners of the company. I don't know how many of you understand corporate law, but this is how it works. The 15 people on the board of directors decide how much of the surplus is going to be paid out as dividends to the shareholders. The dividend paid by the 12 people, 100,000 produce that, and 12 people who are themselves not producers, or 15 on the board, they decide. By the way, under the law, the board of directors has the right to distribute nothing of the surplus to the shareholders. There are many big companies in America that regularly distribute nothing to the shareholder. No dividend. Okay? Zilch. Or they can deliver all of it. It's entirely them who decides. That's the law. And finally, they can take a part of the surplus and use it to what Marx called accumulate capital, grow the company. Now, please understand, what I have just told you is Marx's argument saying everything is about the employer, the board of directors, and the major shareholders. You know, most shares in American companies are owned by a tiny number of people. 1% of shareholders own 75% of the shares. So it's a tiny number of people. For most big corporations, a dozen or two major shareholders and 12 to 15 people on the board of directors selected by the shareholders. You get on the board of directors if the shareholders vote. Every year they vote. You get one vote per each share you own. If you own 1 million shares, you get 1 million votes. If you own no shares, you get no votes. Most workers at General Motors own nothing, or they own 12 shares that their grandmother gave them on their confirmation. They have therefore no power. But those who own big blocks of shares, they have all the power. So a tiny number of people make all of the decisions. And are we surprised? They took the surplus and they said, you know, there's another distribution of the surplus. We're rich and powerful. We better give a cut of the surplus to the political system. That's what we're going to do. We're going to give to the candidate and the party and the special political action committee and all the other apparatus. Why? Why? You need this explained to you? To make sure that the inconvenience of a democratic voting system, where everybody has one vote, not about how much money they have, but by the fact that they're a living person, that's a very dangerous arrangement. Tiny number of people make all the economic decisions. Mass of people have political power. You got to neutralize that, or else you're going to be giving a constant invitation to the mass of people to use the power of universal suffrage to undo the effects of the economy. So what they've done is they've bought the political system. But please understand, what employs people? If they use a lot of the surplus to accumulate, to grow their businesses, that means using the surplus to hire more people. We have employment, we have a good employment situation, we have jobs for all of us, if and only if the tiny number of people who gather the surplus into their hands decide, for their own reasons, to take a large portion of it to grow the company. These days, corporations are making enormous surpluses because wages are low and productivity is high. But you know what? They're not accumulating capital with it at all. The little bit of growing the company that they do happens in another country. They move the money out of the United States and they grow the business in China or Brazil or someplace else. So in this country, nothing. Our politics is bought by the surplus. Our growth is stymied by how they use the surplus. The wealth of the shareholders goes crazy because they distribute a lot of it to them. All the social problems, all the economic problems we've talked about tonight have one common core: a system in which the mass of people gather in the enterprises we have, the corporations, to produce a surplus for a tiny group of people who use them in a way we all have to live with, but we have no power to influence or shape. We're excluded. So of course the logic, if that's your analysis, and this is Marx's analysis, this is what he does in Capital. If that's the analysis, the conclusion, in a sense, leaps out at you. The mass of people, the ones working there, to start with them, they've got to make the decision of what is done with the surplus they all produced. This is not a revolutionary demand, although it is in our culture. It's a logical outcome of the analysis, which is why Marxian economics can't be taught, of course. Because once you lay it out here, and I can tell from your faces, it's kind of straightforward. You can kind of see what ought to be done here. It's done, not rocket science. So you can't have this explained to the American people. Because especially in a country where you babble endlessly about democracy, oh, everything is justified by democracy, that the first question a half-wit would ask is, excuse me, but democracy would mean that the people as a whole would make these decisions. The mass of people who produce the surplus and the mass of people who live with the results of the surplus. That's us would have to have a way to decide what to do with the surplus we produce, since it shapes the lives we live. And that's the end of capitalism. No more small group of people, no more accumulation of shares, no more boards of directors elected by shareholders according to how many shares. That's over.
Hello guys, welcome back to the channel. I just hope that you've learned from whatever the professor have said. And I know that these insights are usually important because they give us direction. They give us understand to know how these people operate. And I think that's a perfect example. That's a perfect model that Dr. Richard DeWolf has shared. And I also have some points also to give in regards to this. I have some presentation that I want to share with you that I feel like it's important. And the first model that these people use actually is called the classical capitalist model, or what is called the wage, labor, and surplus value. In traditional capitalism, the employer, that's the capitalists themselves, hire workers, pay them wages, and extract surplus value, what we call profit today, from their labor. Now, what mechanism did these people use to do the classical capitalist model? Now, black workers historically positioned at the lowest end of our wage scale, receiving lower wages but generate massive profits for the corporations, right? Now, Wolf argues that the system is rigged to maximize capitalist gain while limiting economic mobility for workers, particularly black labor, right? Now, from slavery to sharecropping to minimum wage jobs, black labor has been systematically undercompensated relative to value it creates, right? Another thing that I would like to talk about still as my second model, and this is the most common model that was used during those days of slavery, is called the racialized capitalism model. Now, Dr. Wolf aligns with scholars who emphasize how capitalism and racism are deeply intertwined. He argues that racial divisions are not accidental, but are strategically maintained to sustain economic exploitation, And now the key exploitative tactics that they use, and I promise to share the techniques that they used, and I promise to share the tactics that they use. First is what is called dual labor market. Black workers are disproportionately forced to work into low-wage, precarious jobs, while white workers have higher access to stable, well-paying jobs, right? Now, we have the corporate divide and conquer strategy. Capitalists encourage racial division to prevent worker unity and rebellion. For example, they don't want unions, they don't want... and historically excluded black workers, and that's what they did, right? Another thing as a technique that they also use is something, and I think you know this, something called housing and redlining policies. Economic disparities between black and white families were deliberately created through exclusion from wealth building opportunities like home ownership. The third thing that I would like to talk about is consumer capitalism, right? Consumer capitalism, black spending, white profits. That's the third model, what is called the consumer capitalism. And you know that black people have a culture of consumerism. The United States usually drive its citizen to be a consuming country, a country that consumes good without even thinking of production or thinking about how to make your own like self. Again, The product that you are consuming is the product that the same other workers have produced. These people have gained profit, so they want to keep on producing to give them back the money, right? To give them back the money that you worked and they paid you, when again you pay to buy the products that you worked for. That's why the United States uses this capitalism model to get money out of your pockets. Now, and you know very well that Dr. Wolf critiques consumer capitalism, where black communities are encouraged to spend on luxury goods while owning little capital. Exploitative patterns that they use are companies heavily market clothing, alcohol, sports, entertainment, and brands to black consumers, reinforcing a spend, not save culture. Despite trillions of dollars in black consumer spending power, much of this wealth circulates black to white owned business. Black to white owned business. And you understand how this operates. I'd like to talk about, as my fourth talk, globalized capitalism and the black working class. That's the fourth model. In neoliberal capitalism, corporates seek cheaper labor worldwide. This impacts black workers as industry relocate, cutting jobs and creating economic instability. How it exploits black labor? It does it by deindustrialization of black cities. Jobs in manufacturing, where many black workers were employed, were sent overseas, leading to economic collapse in cities like Detroit. Prison industrial complex also. Mass incarceration of black men provides cheap labor for corporations, mirroring slave labor. For example, prison labor, working companies at cents per hour. Talk about gig economy. Gig economy, this is the modern freelance. Work benefits corporation by avoiding benefits, pensions, and job security. Disproportionately affect black workers. Another model is the alternative model, which is called work-owned cooperatives. Wolf advocates for a shift away from hierarchical capitalism towards worker-owned enterprises. Why this helps black labor? One, black communities can own and control their workplaces, keeping profits within instead of being extracted by corporations. Another thing, this encourages economic democracy, giving workers direct control over decisions. The third thing is that this reduces racial wage. Gap because decision-making power is shared. Also, I'd like to make a conclusion about capitalism, race, and exploitation. Richard de Wolf argues that capitalism thrives by maintaining economic and racial inequalities, and that's what this has always been about. It has always been about the divide. Now, when white people and black people are divided, people are not going to be having trade unions because they can't talk about the sentiments or the things that they are going through. And as a result, what does this mean? This means that they will not get an avenue to discuss or to talk about the problems that they're going through. Now, the American corporate system systematically extracts wealth from black labor while limiting black wealth accumulation. By doing what? By providing what is called a consumerism culture. That's what the American dream, that's what the American system is always trying to inject within its citizens. The consumerism culture. You'll always want to consume, and consume, because you went to make the same product. You'll use your money that they paid you to buy so that you can buy it at a profit, return the money, and return it extra by buying the product that you are the one who created or who came up with. Right? So I would like to know, tell me what you feel about this video. Generally, I would love to know definitely your honest opinion in regards to this, because I know that every day sometimes it's always a learning day within this channel. So feel free to share with me what you feel like you want to share with me. I'll most definitely appreciate you. And if you're watching this video for the first time, I'll most definitely ask you to subscribe to the channel, join our membership, and really get to see what we can offer you. But until then, I'm hoping to see you in my next video. If you wish to buy me a coffee, you can check out my Cash App on my bio. I'll most definitely also appreciate you. Until then, let me see you in my next video. Peace, love, and harmony. Salute.